Ove continued avoiding his neighbors. He didn't want any problems with them. But unfortunately, the problems seemed to have decided to seek out Ove instead. A few weeks after his house repairs were finished, one of his suited neighbors was burgled. It was the second burglary in the area in a relatively short period. The suits got together early next morning to deliberate on that young rascal in the condemned house, who must have had something to do with it. They knew very well where he'd got the money for all the renovation. In the evening, someone stuck a note under Ove's door, on which it was written, "Clear off if you know what's good for you." The night after that, a stone was thrown through his window. Ove picked up the stone and changed the glass in the window. He never confronted the suits, so no purpose in it. But he wasn't going to move either. Early the next morning, he was woken by the smell of smoke. He was out of his bed in an instant. The first thing that came into his head was that whoever had thrown that stone had apparently not finished yet. On his way down the stairs, he instinctively grabbed a hammer. Not that Ove had ever been a violent man, but you could never be sure, he decided. He was wearing only his underpants when he stepped onto the front veranda. All the lugging of construction materials in the last months had turned Ove into an impressively muscular young man without him even noticing. His bare upper body and the hammer swinging in his clenched right fist made the group gathered in the street momentarily take their eyes off the fire and instinctively take a step back. And that was when Ove realized that it was not his house that was burning, but his neighbor's. The suits stood in the street, staring like deer into headlights. The elderly man emerged out of the smoke, his wife leaning on his arm. She was coughing terribly. When the elderly man handed her over to one of the suit's wives and then turned back towards the fire, several of the suits cried out to him, telling him to leave it. "It's too late. Wait for the fire brigade." They rolled. The elder man didn't listen. Burning material fell over the threshold, and he tried to step inside into a sea of fire. Ove stood in the face of the wind by his gate and saw how scattered glowing balls had already set the dry grass all light between his house and the neighbors. For a few long drawn out seconds, he evaluated the situation as best he could. The fire would be all over his house in a few minutes if he didn't charge off to get the water hose set at once. He saw the elderly man trying to push his way past an overturned bookcase on his way into house. The suits shouted his name and tried to make him stop, but the elder man's wife was screaming out another man, their grandchild. Ove weighed on his heels as he watched the embers stealing their way through the grass. In all honesty, he was probably not thinking so much about what he wanted to do, but what his father would have done. And as soon as that thought had taken root, there was not much choice about it, he muttered, irritated, looking at the house at last time. instinctively calculating to himself how many hours it had taken to build it, and then he ran towards the fire. The house was so filled with thick, sticky smoke that it was like being struck in the face with a shovel. The elderly man struggled to move a fallen bookcase which was blocking the door, overthrew it aside as if it was made of paper, and cleared the way up the stairs. By the time they emerged into the light of dawn, the elderly man was carrying the boy in his soot-covered arms. Ove had long, bleeding gazes across his chest and arms. The bystanders just ran around, panicking, screaming. The air was pierced by sirens. Uniformed firemen surrounded them, still only wearing his underpants and with aching lungs. Ove saw the first flames climbing his own house. He charged across the lawn, but was immediately stopped by a group of firemen. They were everywhere all of a sudden, refused to let him through. A man in a white shirt, some sort of chief fireman, as Ove understood it, stood before him with his legs wide apart and explained that they couldn't let him try to extinguish the fire in his own house. It was much too dangerous. Unfortunately, the white shirt explained after that, the fire brigade could not put it out either until they had the appropriate permissions from the authorities. It turned out that because Ober's house now lay exactly on the municipal boundary, clearance from the command center was required on the shortwave radio before they could get to work. Permission had to be sought, papers had to be stamped. Rules are rules, the man in the white shirt explained in a monotone voice when Ove protested. Ove tore himself free and ran in fury towards the warder's horse, but it was futile. By the time the firemen got the all-clear signal, the house was already engulfed by fire. Ove stood in his garden and watched, helpless and in sorrow, as it burned. When a few hours later he stood in a telephone box calling the insurance company, he learned that they had never heard of the jovial man with a round face. There was no valid insurance policy on the house. The woman from the insurance company sighed, impatiently explaining that swindlers often went from door to door claiming to be from their company, and that she hoped at least Ove hadn't given him any cash. Ove hung up and clenched his fist in his pocket. Thank you for listening.